Chapter 1. The Duel of Honor. The morning fog clung low to the moors of quenelles, curling around the legs of the gathered nobles like serpents of chill mist. Dew-slick grass crunched beneath polished sabatons as the court encircled the appointed dueling ground, an ancient circle of stone, etched with faded fleur-de-lis and prayer sigils to the lady. Banners flapped in the gentle wind, and the scent of damp earth mingled with something far sharper, anticipation, and a quiet hunger for spectacle. Sir Lucien de Martel stood bareheaded beneath a grey sky, his shoulder-length hair plastered to his cheeks with sweat, not from heat but from the cold steel anticipation coursing through his blood. His armor gleamed, a full suit of silver-inlaid plate polished so fine the morning light kissed it with pale gold. Upon his breastplate was the sigil of House Martel, a crescent moon cradling a sword. But already whispers slithered through the noble onlookers. Did he not accept coin from that Estalian merchant? They say he gambled in Araby, dishonored himself in a brothel duel, and fit for the lady's blessing. Mark my words. Lucien heard them all. He held his helm at his side like a skull of steel, his eyes locked not on the murmuring crowd but on the man standing across from him, Sir Aldric Levet, golden-hayed and rose-lipped, paragon of virtue. The duel had been demanded after Lucien's accusations of Aldric's cowardice at Coronne had gone public. Lucien had expected a court reprimand. Instead, Aldric chose blades. It was to be a duel of honor. To the blood, not to the death, but both men knew such bounds were often blurred. The herald stepped forth, parchment in one hand, bell in the other. By decree of Duke Giraud of Quenelles, and in accordance with the chivalric code of Bretonnia, let it be known that Sir Lucien de Martel and Sir Aldric Levet shall now engage in honorable single combat. May the lady grant wisdom to their swords. The bell rang once, a toll like doom. Lucien slid his helm over his brow. The hiss of steel against his skin sent a shiver down his spine. The visor clamped shut, darkness narrowing his world into a slit of morning gray and glinting armor. Swords were drawn. They circled, slow and reverent, each step measured. Sir Aldric moved with fluid elegance, his rapier flicking like a viper's tongue. Lucien favored a heavier longsword, blunt and brutal, but wielded with the grace of a man who trained with it since boyhood. Then it began. A clash of metal. Steel rang like a struck bell as the first flurry burst between them. Parry, riposte, counter. Sparks leapt like fireflies. Lucien caught a cut to the shoulder, blood wetting the links beneath his pauldron, but he drove Aldric back with a snarling counter-strike. The duel was meant for honor, but Lucien's blade sang a deeper song, one of resentment, of exiled nights and sleepless fury, of watching cowards praised, while truth was spat upon. He pressed harder. Blades howled as they collided again. Aldric's face twisted, not in fear but in confusion. This was no simple duel. Lucien fought like a starving man, tearing into his first meal in days. He cut through Aldric's defenses with a force that bordered on unholy. A knee drove into Aldric's chest. He staggered. A gauntleted fist followed, crack, breaking bone and tooth as it slammed into his mouth. The crowd gasped. This was not chivalric. Aldric dropped his rapier. "Yield," someone cried. But Lucien did not stop. He raised his sword two-handed and brought it down. The first strike split Aldric's shoulder guard, the second cracked his collarbone, blood sprayed, thick and hot, onto the dueling stone, and the third blow aimed downward in a vicious arc buried itself halfway into Aldric's torso with a meaty crunch. Armor buckled, ribs broke. A scream was cut off, half-word. Silence followed, thick, appalled. Lucien stood over the dying man, his breath loud and ragged behind the steel helm. The blood on his blade steamed in the cold air. The only sound was the gurgle from Aldric's ruined lungs and the distant, echoing cry of a crow overhead. Then came the words that sealed his fate. "Imps was unarmed," the herald muttered. "The duel is void." The nobles turned away, muttering prayers, some averting their eyes, others staring with open horror. The Duke's men stepped forward. One knight, pale with rage, called out, "Sir Lucien de Martel, by blood and oath you are henceforth stripped of title and land. You have forsaken the lady's mercy." Lucien raised his visor. His face was expressionless. His eyes, however, blazed. "I never asked for her mercy." He left his sword in Aldrich's corpse as he walked from the circle of stone, each step echoing like judgment, the whispers returning now in full, louder and crueler. Behind him, the wind howled. And somewhere deep within his mind, or perhaps within the hilt of the sword he'd left behind, a voice, soft and coaxing, laughed. Chapter 2. The Road of Exile. The wind tore across the gray mountains with the shrillness of a widow's wail, whistling through jagged ravines and over snow-bitten peaks like the cries of ancient ghosts. The world was stone, ice, and endless sky, the realm of wolves, brigands, and darker things that wandered under moonlight. Lucien de Martel trudged the mountain pass alone, a black figure against the ashen snow. His armor was still polished but dulled now with the grime of travel and rusting streaks where blood had dried and flaked away. His sword, cleaned but no longer sheathed in pride, hung from his back like a burden, wrapped in a tattered standard that once bore the Martel crest. He had turned it to rags. Days had passed since the duel, since exile. The road beneath his sabatons was no road at all, just a treacherous sliver of ledge hugging the cliffs above a chasm that swallowed light. One slip would send him plummeting to a death, unmarked and unmourned. But Lucien did not stumble. His steps were too angry to falter. Bitter wind gnawed at his exposed face. His cheeks were raw and red, lips split and bleeding, but he didn't flinch. Pain was a companion now, a reminder. Each throb in his shoulder from the duel's wound, each ache in his frostbitten fingers, they kept him awake, kept him moving. At night, when he found shallow shelter beneath overhangs or in crumbling watchtowers, abandoned by men and gods alike, the dreams came. And with them, the voice. It was faint at first, like a whisper hidden beneath the sound of crackling firewood or wind-stirred leaves. But it grew clearer each night. He begged. He wept. "And still you struck, beautiful." Lucien sat by his fire, hands outstretched to the flame. His sword lay across his knees, its steel faintly catching the light like the edge of a grin. He stared at it. "Be silent," he muttered, but the voice answered only with laughter. It wasn't a voice like any he knew, neither man nor woman. It slithered like silk and struck like thunder, a harmony of contradiction. "They cast you out, and yet they all watched. They drank in your violence like wine, but they still wear masks. You do not. That is why you are free." Lucien clenched his fists. The worst part, he wasn't sure the voice came from within. It didn't feel like madness, it felt like presence. That night, he did not sleep. On the 7th day of his wandering, he came upon a roadside shrine to the Lady of the Lake, carved in soft limestone and half buried in snow. The eyes of the statue had been worn smooth by time, her hands raised in eternal benediction. Lucien stared at it, hollow-eyed. Then he drew his sword. The first strike sheared off her hands. Stone fingers scattered across the snow like broken icicles. The second blow caved in her face, dust pluming as her head shattered from the neck. He struck again and again, carving through the shrine in an explosion of fury, stone and snow spraying like bone and blood. When it was done, only a jagged ruin remained. Lucien stood, panting, the blade humming faintly in his grip. "You are not hers," The voice purred. Not anymore. That night, sleep came easily, deep, dreamless. But the peace did not last. He awoke to howls. 3 figures approached through the mist. Bandits, their armor a patchwork of leather and chain, faces hidden by scarves and cracked helms. They saw the ruined shrine. They saw Lucien. They saw prey. Night, the first called, voice thick with mirth. Ain't many of your kind up here. You lost, pretty boy? Lucien rose slowly. His hand never left the sword. No, he said flatly. Not lost. Just fallen. The second bandit drew a curved blade and spat into the snow. Ain't that poetic? Strip the armor. We'll fetch a decent price for it, once he's cold. They moved in. Lucien did not wait. His blade hissed free, and the first stroke came like lightning. The nearest man's head did not simply fall, it burst, cleaved at the jaw, and torn asunder as if by a butcher's cleaver. Bone cracked. Teeth flew. Blood fountained in a hot red arc that painted the snow. The second hesitated, just long enough for Lucien to close the gap. He did not swing with elegance. He hacked. A savage downward chop crushed shoulder through lung, splitting the man near in half. Gore soaked Lucien's arms as the corpse collapsed in spasms. The last bandit turned to flee. Too late. Lucien hurled his sword like a javelin. It spun once, twice, then punched through the man's back with a wet, meaty crack. He fell, face first, shrieking, hands clawing at the snow. Lucien walked over, retrieved his weapon, and without a word ended the noise with a clean stab through the base of the skull. Silence returned. The wind blew. The snow drank. Lucien stood amidst 3 corpses, steam rising from the blood pooling beneath him. And then the voice returned. But now it was different. Yes, that was art. The rhythm of death, the cadence of the kill. The blade is more than steel, it is desire. Yours, mine, ours. Lucien stared at the weapon, breathless. Somewhere inside him, shame tried to rise. But it drowned in the warmth of violence, the intimacy of death. He looked down the mountain path toward the unknown. I will never kneel again, he whispered. And so he walked, sword in hand, not as a knight, but as something else, something becoming. Chapter 3. Blood and Sand. The border princes, where mountains bled into deserts and law cracked beneath the sun. No crown ruled here, only steel. This was where civilization came to die, forgotten and sun-scorched, where exiled lords and mad prophets founded petty kingdoms on the backs of blades, a land without mercy. Lucien de Martel arrived in the heat of midday, his armor caked with dust and sweat, his eyes hidden beneath the shadow of a rusted helmet. He walked into the town of Val-Yerzin, a festering maze of sandstone hovels and twisted alleys, built beside a dried riverbed and stinking of sweat, spice, and blood. The people here didn't look, didn't speak. They just watched, lips tight, eyes wary. He headed straight for the place that pulled all exiles eventually, the pit. It sat at the town's center like a wound in the earth, sunken and rimmed with spiked walls. A dozen layers of bleachers ringed the arena, swarming with gamblers, drunkards, and mercenaries. Wooden posts dripped with the flayed skins of past challengers. The scent of blood was thick, baked into the sand, soaked into the stone. It wasn't just an arena. It was a temple. Lucien stood before the gate, eyes scanning the crude iron sign hammered above it. Only the worthy bleed. A pitmaster emerged, a hulking brute with a face like a beaten anvil and tattoos spiraling down both arms. His voice was gravel soaked in wine. "You fight?" Lucien didn't answer. He tossed his sword down into the dirt. It hit with a dull thunk, its steel glinting faintly beneath the grime. The pitmaster bent, picked it up, waited. Too heavy, too plain, not for show. Lucien said only one thing, "Let me in." The pitmaster eyed him a moment longer, then grunted. "Tomorrow, blood noon. You win, you eat. You lose, well, the dogs don't mind bones." He spat. The deal was struck. That night, Lucien slept beneath the wooden stands, amidst the scent of hay, offal, and old death. And the blade spoke again. "They will cheer for you. They will worship what you are becoming, but not yet. First you must show them." Lucien did not reply, but he smiled. The next day the pit roared. The crowd was a cacophony of laughter, screams, and clinking coin purses. Men with scarred faces and painted eyes shouted bets over dancing slaves and writhing torchlight. In the center, the sand was smooth, fresh, untouched. The blood of yesterday had been raked away to make room for more. Lucien stood at one gate, stripped of armor save for his breastplate and greaves. Dust clung to his skin like second flesh. Across from him, the gate yawned open, and a figure emerged. A mountain of meat and madness, Goran the ox. Naked to the waist, covered in ritual scars and wielding a twin-headed flail that swung like a storm of iron, the crowd bellowed his name. Lucien walked forward, sword in hand, the sand already scorching through his boots. He could feel their eyes, their hunger. The announcer, clad in flayed silk, raised his arms. "Blood noon begins. To yield is shame, to flee is death. Let steel decide." The horn blasted. Goran charged. The flail swung once, high, from the left, and Lucien ducked beneath it, feeling the air scream as it passed. The second head came low, skimming the sand, and Lucien leapt backward. Dust flew. Goran laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. "Too pretty to die, come, little knight," Lucien answered with steel. He closed the distance, fast, blade flashing. His first strike bit deep into Goran's side, but not fatal. The flesh was thick. The man barely flinched. A meaty fist cracked into Lucien's jaw. Stars exploded behind his eyes as he staggered. Then the flail came again. Lucien raised his sword to block, and the impact rattled through his bones, numbing his arm. He rolled aside, sand filling his mouth, coughing grit as he came up hard. "Show them," the voice whispered. "Make it beautiful." Lucien stood. He ran, straight at Goran. This time, he didn't dodge. He dived under the next swing, rolling beneath the giant's legs, and as Goran turned, confused, off balance, Lucien sprang up behind him and drove his blade upward. The point pierced beneath the ribcage, angled through meat and gristle, into the lungs. Lucien twisted. Once, twice. Goran roared in pain. Lucien yanked the blade free, spun behind him, and slashed deep across the hamstring. Tendons snapped. The colossus dropped to one knee. Lucien stepped forward, calm, almost tender, and with a final deliberate motion he sliced Gurgan's throat wide open, ear to ear. Blood gushed in a thick curtain, dark and steaming, spraying across Lucien's chest. The crowd shrieked out in horror, in ecstasy. They roared his name, not yet known, but repeated nonetheless. "The dual bomb," they cried. "The black blade." Lucien stood in the rain of red, his sword lifted, his chest rising and falling with breath that tasted of iron and fire. "Now they see," the voice purred, and so did he. The crowd didn't matter. The pitmaster, the rules, the blood, only the dance, only the art. He bowed, not to the crowd, to the blade. Chapter 4. The Mask of Glory. Valor and forgot men quickly. In the shifting tides of blood and sand, names rose like fire and faded into ash. But not his, not Lucien's, not dual-born. Within weeks, his legend metastasized. Each kill became a sermon. Each duel a holy rite. His entrance alone was spectacle. A black silhouette stepping from shadow, face obscured by a helm sculpted like a fanged beast. Twin eye slits glowed faintly beneath the visor, illusions wrought from charcoal and oil, yet whispered to be something more. Some claimed the mask was forged from the skull of a daemon. Others swore it drank the souls of those who dared look too long. Lucien let them speak. Let them worship. The mask became his identity, his rebirth. He no longer walked Val Urson's streets by day. Instead, he drifted between dusk and blood, sleeping only when the stars grew pale, dreaming in colorless fever. He woke with his sword beside him, always clean, always whispering. More, it would say. Again, deeper. In the arena, his technique evolved. It was no longer simply about survival or victory. It was about form, about the aesthetic of the kill. He painted death with movement, twirling through strikes, pivoting mid-parry, severing tendons with surgical grace. He beheaded a champion from Tilia while pirouetting. He split a Norse berserker's helm with a downward stroke so precise it halved the skull clean between the eyes. Blood exploded in perfect arcs, splattering the arena walls like a mural. The crowd was not silent. They screamed for him. Women offered themselves. Men followed him like acolytes. Children carved masks into wooden idols and bled mice on the sand in imitation. Lucien did not smile. He merely watched. Each night after a duel he returned to the House of Echoes, a ruined chapel converted into his sanctuary, guarded by a dozen broken men who'd once tried to kill him, now loyal only to his presence. They painted the walls with blood runes, lit incense that stank of cloves and copper. Inside, the blade sat on an altar of bones, and Lucien knelt before it, forehead pressed to the hilt. The voice now came not in dreams. It spoke in prayer. They adore you, but it is not enough. You are not meant to be loved, Lucien. You are meant to be needed. On the 7th week, the pitmaster returned to him with an offer. "You've done what no one's done," the brute grunted. "They come from Araby now, from the north, from Marienburg, just to see you, but the arena's grown, small." Lucien stood over him, masked, silent. "Here's a place, south of here. No rules, no crowd, just coin, killers, and whispers. They call it the Gilded Vein. A dueling circle carved into the bones of a dead palace. Invitation only. They bet souls, not silver." He paused, swallowed. "You've been asked for, personally." Lucien said nothing, but he reached down, took up his sword. The answer was already known. The journey to the Gilded Vein was a blur of dunes and ruined cities. A caravan of robed cultists guided him through forgotten roads, chanting in a tongue that made his skin crawl and blood stir. At night they feasted on narcotic fruits, danced around fires, and wept in ecstasy. He watched, untouched, silent behind his mask. They reached the palace at sunset. Once it had been the jewel of a lost civilization. Ivory spires, obsidian domes, silken canopies drifting like veils in the wind. Now it was a carcass. Collapsed towers, half swallowed by sand, windows melted by sorcery, long dead. But the dueling circle remained. It was carved of polished black glass, ringed by thrones of bone and petrified wood. There was no audience, only nobles, warlocks, and champions seated in reverent silence, masked and veiled. The only sound was breath. The only light came from braziers burning flesh oil and rosewood. Lucien stepped onto the circle. His opponent followed. She was tall, taller than him, draped in silk armor that clung to her like water. Her blade was thin as a whisper, eyes masked behind a porcelain face grinning with painted red lips. No introductions, no names, only death. The first clash was instant, like lightning meeting fire. Lucien moved fast, but she was faster. Her blade kissed his side, nicking flesh through the gap beneath his breastplate. He twisted, brought his pommel down toward her face. She slid beneath it, slashing at his thigh. Blood sprayed, red and perfect. The crowd remained silent. This was not for them. This was for the blade. Lucien adjusted. He changed rhythm. No longer brute strength, but grace. Each strike now a stroke of calligraphy. He ducked, spun, parried, and struck, steel to silk, flesh to edge. Her mask cracked. A piece fell away. A smile, too wide, too eager. She moaned when he cut her again. Blood painted the circle. They circled one another like lovers, like predators. Her breathing quickened. His heartbeat slowed. She thrust, he caught it, twisted her wrist, shattered it with a crunch, and drove his blade through her gut in one fluid motion. The tip emerged behind her spine. She gasped. They leaned forward, whispered something against his mask, something lost in breath and blood. Then she died. The blade pulsed in his hand, warm, satisfied. Lucien pulled it free and she collapsed like a broken doll. Silence reigned. Then the nobles began to kneel. Not to her. To him. He turned slowly, mask catching the firelight. Then he bowed. Not to them, but to the sword. Chapter 5. Whispers in the Steel. The wind that howled through the crumbled arches of the gilded vein whispered with more than air. It was thick with voices, layers of murmuring breath, of gasps and weeping, laughter edged with madness. Not the living, not even the dead, but echoes. Echoes born from blood. Lucien stood in the center of the dueling circle, now darkened with dried crimson, veins of death streaked through obsidian like black marble. The woman's corpse had been taken, her blood still visible where it had soaked into the cracks. No one spoke. No one had dared to approach him. He hadn't left the circle. 3 days had passed. He hadn't eaten, hadn't slept. He knelt by the blade. The silence of the palace was broken only by his breath and by the whispers rising from the steel. Deeper now, they cooed. The blade is not a tool, it is a mirror. Look into it. See what you are. Lucien stared into the reflection along the flat of the sword. His face, masked, peered back, but the eye slits flickered. Not his eyes. Other eyes, not human. Swirling with colors that did not belong in the... He gripped the hilt tighter. Blood seeped from his palms, not from any wound, but as if the sword demanded offering. Images flashed, hallucinations, perhaps, or visions. 100 duels, 1,000 deaths, men and women crying out, their final moments frozen in ballet. He stood above each, bathed in their ruin. Their lifeblood ran across his arms like garlands. Their screams harmonized with the blade's song. Lucien swayed, he did not resist. And then came the memory. The one he had buried. The first. Not the noble duels of Bretonnia, not the arena, but before, a child no older than 10, taken from his bed in a village raid, his first kill, not with a sword but a jagged rock, pounding the skull of a raider who had broken his mother's spine and tried to drag him away. The man's teeth had broken first, then the eye collapsed, then the skull caved like fruit left in the sun. Lucien had screamed the whole time. Screamed and kept striking, even after the man stopped twitching. His first ecstasy. The memory ended. He was on his knees. Sweat ran cold down his spine. His mouth was dry, yet he felt alive. More than ever. The whisper in the sword shifted tones, richer now, hungrier. Yes. You remember. Not just the act, the feeling, the moment of clarity, of purity. That is who you are. A conduit, a maestro. Each strike a note, each death a chorus. The blade pulsed. Lucien rose slowly. His vision had shifted. The world shimmered, edges sharper, light deeper. Even the silence around him now felt alive, throbbing with breathless anticipation. He turned. The pitmaster from Val-Yerzine stood at the edge of the circle. Behind him, 4 others. One was masked in crimson lacquer, another bore a crown of rusted nails hammered into his scalp. One wept blood from sewn-shut eyes. The 4th was a woman, her skin pale and shining, clad in a robe that did not conceal but revealed. Her presence was a whisper of perfume and decay. The pitmaster spoke first. "They've come for you. Heard your song. Each of them bears a blade that's tasted more than blood. They want to see if your steel sings as sweetly up close." Lucien nodded once, and the pitmaster stepped back. The 4 entered the ring. They didn't speak. They bowed, as was custom. Not to each other, but to him. They knew there would be no bets, no crowd, only the blade. The first struck like a serpent, his blade thin and curved, spinning around Lucien with dizzying grace. Lucien parried, steel on steel shrieking. The masked one ducked, rolled, came up swinging. Lucien twisted, evaded, and drove his sword through the man's side so quick, so clean, that the masked one didn't realize he was dying until his guts spilled from the cleft, ribbing into the sand. The second came next, the crowned one. He bellowed a war cry, two-handed hammer rising in an arc. Lucien met it, stepped into the swing, taking the hammer's shaft beneath the arm, and rammed his elbow into the man's throat. Bone cracked. The hammer fell. Lucien used the weight of his sword like a butcher's cleaver, driving it into the collarbone, splitting down to the heart. A wet crunch. A gurgle. Two remained. The weeping one ran. No blade, no armor. Just screaming, hands clawing at his own face, blood blinding him. He stumbled into Lucien's reach. The blade whispered, "Race." Lucien gave it. A clean slash across the chest, then a spin, the tip arcing into the man's spine with a sickening snap. The body spasmed, then fell limp, twitching like a puppet with strings cut. Only the woman remained. She walked toward him, unarmed. Lucien raised the blade, wary. She knelt. Then, without word, bit into her own wrist, tore open flesh, blood poured down her arm. She smeared it on the blade, and whispered, "Now you're ready." Lucien stared, and the sword began to sing. Not a whisper now, not words. A symphony. A glorious scream of battle lust, of perfection, of agony and rapture, interwoven. He raised the sword to the sky. The gilded veins shook, and Lucien laughed, deep, honest, and pure. The steel no longer whispered. It spoke. Chapter 6. The Cult of Crimson Silk. The wind that caressed the dunes outside the gilded vein had shifted. It no longer howled, it hummed, as if the very air trembled with restrained desire and violent intent. The desert watched Lucien walk through it. No longer a man, but something more refined, more dangerous. Each step left no print, as though the sand itself feared to remember him. They came at dusk, figures cloaked in silks the color of arterial blood, faces hidden behind masks carved with ecstatic expressions, rapture, agony, lust. They moved in silence, their procession smooth and sensual, like dancers caught mid-maiden. They bowed low, hands pressed to hearts. Lucien said nothing. They did not speak either, not at first. Instead, they unrolled a length of cloth before him, upon which were laid gifts. A vial of demon ink that pulsed like a heartbeat, a chalice of red mercury, and a scroll written in a language that slithered when seen. Finally, one stepped forward, a man, tall and lean, dressed in crimson robes layered with veils of translucent gold. His voice was silk-soaked in sin. "We have watched you, Duelborn, through mirrors, through blood, through the breath of dying men. You have danced well." Lucien's head tilted. "Who are you?" "We are the cult of crimson silk, artists, but not of canvas or verse. Our medium is suffering, our muse chaos." He raised a gloved hand to his brow in reverence. "We follow the path of exaltation through sensation, through death as divine climax, through beauty as carnage. We serve both she who thirsts and he who hungers." Lucien's eyes narrowed behind the mask. Slanish and Corn. The Keltist grinned. Two gods, opposed yet inseparable. One seeks perfection in the art of sensation, the other purity in slaughter. But you are their meeting point, the blade that sings with every kill, the curve of blood as it arcs, perfect and red. You have already begun." Lucien said nothing. The wind pressed against his cloak like a lover's hand. Another cultist approached, a woman this time, her mask split down the middle, one side a weeping maiden, the other a snarling beast. She carried a bundle of black silk. From it she drew a cloak. It shimmered with impossible threads, shifting between shadow and crimson with every fold. Etched into it were glyphs that pulsed faintly, alive with raw chaos. She knelt, holding it out. "For the Duelborn," she whispered, "who has not yet championed, but will be." Lucien reached forward, took it. The fabric slid across his shoulders like oil and fire, weightless yet heavy with presence. The moment it touched his skin, something shifted within him. His pulse slowed, his breath deepened. He could feel them. Schlegensch and Korn, watching, one with a breathless moan, the other with a silent snarl. The cultists encircled him, chanting now in a language of cuts and kisses. Their voices rose, layered, twisting over each other like vines strangling stone. Blood was poured into a basin, fresh, steaming, filled with torn petals and bits of bone. "Drink," said the first cultist. Lucien took the chalice. It burned his throat like molten glass. It filled his mind with color, not light but sensations. He saw a battlefield of roses, each thorn tipped with poison, each bloom a screaming mouth. He felt the rush of a kill before it happened, the euphoria of a scream as a soul left the body. And deep within, the blade whispered, "We are whole now." The ritual climaxed. The cultists fell to their knees, cutting into their own flesh, offering pain as praise. Some wept, others laughed. One pulled out his own eye and cradled it like a newborn, the sand soaked red. Lucien stood among them, still unmoved, until his fingers curled around the hilt of his sword, and a soft hum began to rise from it. The cult fell silent, and then at once they began to chant. "Duelborn, blood dancer, masked messiah, blade of crimson perfection." He raised the sword. The chanting intensified. A moment later, Lucien turned and pointed toward the north, toward the wastes. He spoke just once, voice cold and sure. "Now we walk the real path." The cult rose, rapturous, and the desert trembled beneath their feet. Chapter 7. Marked in Blood and Velvet. The road north was no longer a path, it was a consecration. Lucien marched at the head of the procession, dozens behind him, cloaked in crimson and veiled in gold, barefoot through the burning sands, their flesh carved with sigils that bled but did not clot. The cult of crimson silk moved like a river of whispered prayers, of moans and gasps, as if every step was a wound willingly received. They followed not for coin, not for glory, but for him, the duel-born. They reached the Shattershine Ridge by dusk, a mountain range so twisted and broken it looked like the gods had smashed their fists into the earth. Jagged peaks rose like the teeth of a giant beast, cracked and bleeding minerals that stank of rust and rot. Here the sky dimmed unnaturally, the sun hung low, but shadows lengthened, as if alive. And atop the highest peak stood the altar of twofold devotion, a ruin of obsidian and bone, left by a nameless sect long devoured by madness. Twin statues flanked the altar, one a towering brute carved in jagged lines, its mouth locked in an eternal scream, the other a graceful figure with too many fingers and a face like melted silk. Corn and Slaanesh stone-bound and silent, opposites made to endure each other's presence in cruel eternity. Lucien stepped forward alone. The cultist knelt behind him, heads bowed to the dust. He approached the altar, sword in hand, cloak billowing in the wind that hissed through the stones like a dying breath. The blade began to vibrate, a low hum in his bones. "This is where it begins," it whispered. "This is where you die and are reborn." Lucien laid the sword on the altar. Instantly, blood welled from the stone. Not his, not from the sky. It seeped up from the cracks, hot and thick, smelling of iron and rosewater. The blade drank. Its steel gleamed. The runes on his cloak flared to life, casting dancing shadows across the shrine. Then came the pain. From above, the sky split. Lightning of crimson and violet forked across the clouds. Thunder cracked like a war drum. And then, the descent. Entities, not seen, felt. The presence of corn came first, like a war cry echoing through bone, like the heat of 1,000 forges burning flesh into ash. It seared Lucien's mind with rage, with purpose. There was no art here, no seduction, only clarity, only violence. A symbol scorched itself into Lucien's chest, an 8-pointed star surrounded by a ring of teeth. He screamed, but the scream never left his throat, because then came the second. Slaanesh arrived like a kiss that pierced, a perfume that strangled, a lover's breath laced with poison and pleasure. Lucien's senses exploded, colors deepened, textures shifted, even the wind against his skin became overwhelming. He saw himself in infinite poses, dancing, killing, weeping, becoming. Another mark bloomed across his back, an elegant spiral of thorns and curved blades, shimmering in lavender flame. His flesh tore, but did not bleed. The wounds stayed open, glistening, alive. And in that moment, the two presences collided within him. Rage met ecstasy, fury met grace. He felt his mind crack, but not shatter. Instead, it expanded. He saw the symmetry of slaughter, the poetry of a throat slit with precision, the religion of screaming death. Lucien rose from the altar, no longer a man, not yet a god, but something between. His eyes glowed, one red, one violet. The sword in his hand pulsed with a heartbeat not his own. Behind him the cultists lifted their heads, insane. It was not a hymn. It was not in any mortal tongue. It was a sound that should not be, a chorus of agony and adoration, a sound that made the stones weep and the wind recoil. Lucien turned, and the cult fell prostrate. Dalborn, they cried, chosen of the red and the rose. He raised his blade, and from the stones beneath his feet rose phantoms, visions of his past kills, their mouths open in eternal scream, their blood swirling into the air like paint flung by a master. The sky darkened further, and from the clouds above, a whisper fell like a blade. Go forth, spread the wound, preach through pain. Lucien smiled behind the mask and took his first step north. Chapter 8. A Dance of Blades. The northern air was different, thinner, colder, yet heavy with something intangible. It pressed against the skin like a silk noose. Lucien welcomed it. Each step into the frontier of chaos was like stepping deeper into a dream made of razors. He traveled through forests that bled sap the color of bruises, over rivers that whispered back in voices not his own. Villages lay in ruin, their corpses arranged in spirals or posed like dancers frozen mid-motion, all untouched since their final scream. The cult followed in his wake, ever-growing, feeding on the madness he trailed behind like perfume. And always there were challengers. Word of the Duelborn had spread beyond the border princes, beyond the desolate kingdoms of petty warlords and failed pretenders. Now the North heard, and it answered. The first came at dusk, an orc war boss, towering and muscle-bound, armor strapped together from the skulls of his own kin. He found Lucien on a barren plain littered with shattered bones and frozen blood, roaring his challenge with breath that reeked of old meat and rage. Lucien said nothing. He simply stepped forward. The duel lasted less than a minute. The war boss's axe came down with the fury of a mountain. Lucien moved like water through stone, sidestepping, spinning, and then carving. His sword found the soft place beneath the jaw, sliding up and through. The orc's head snapped back, a fountain of black blood sprang skyward, steaming in the air. Lucien twisted free as the body collapsed like a felled tower. The cult wept in joy. They licked the blood from the snow. Then came the night. A black, armored figure who claimed to have served chaos since before Lucien's birth. He spoke in ancient dialects and dragged a blade the size of a man's body. His face was obscured by a helm shaped like a wolf's skull, eyes flickering with green fire. Their duel was art. No spectators, no distractions. Steel rang like music across the ice fields. Each blow met with perfect counter. The knight fought with the brutal precision of Khorne's oldest teachings: cleave, crush, kill. Lucien moved with the liquid grace of Slaanesh's dancers: twist, slice, slip. Blood bloomed in slow spirals, dotting the snow like crimson petals. They fought for hours, until Lucien began to hum, a tune without words, a rhythm only the blade understood. He let himself be wounded, deliberately, just to feel the thrill of pain again, to use it, to channel it. He bled from his shoulder, his ribs, a deep cut across his thigh, but he smiled behind the mask. The knight faltered. One misstep. Lucien pirouetted. His blade flashed. The knight's left arm fell away, severed at the shoulder in a clean arc. He staggered, trying to raise his blade again, but Lucien was already inside his guard. A stab through the heart. Then a slow, dragging pull down to the pelvis, splitting him like an opened book. The knight collapsed. Lucien stood over the corpse, chest rising with slow, satisfied breaths. The humming stopped, but the blade still pulsed. He walked on. More came. A mutant with 12 arms and saws for fingers. A daemon host, bound in chains of gold, its eyes weeping black fire. A duel against twins, their minds bound as one, their blades a mirrored assault of perfect symmetry. Lucien defeated them all. Each kill deepened his mastery, not just of the sword, but of the performance. He did not merely strike, he choreographed. Each battle became theater, each wound a stanza, each final blow a crescendo. He began to speak only in duel. Words became unnecessary. Challenge was his language, his sword, his voice. In the ruins of a temple, buried in snow, he faced a warband of 30, a rival cult that claimed dual worship was heresy, that one must choose. They offered him mercy if he renounced his path. Lucien stepped forward. The snow ran red for an hour. Not a single blow landed on him. He painted the temple's broken altar with their blood, then knelt and whispered, "Let both gods see this. I serve where they meet, in blood, in bliss." The wind howled its approval, and somewhere, far beyond the mortal world, two gods, so opposite, so eternally at war, paused. Not to agree, but to watch. Chapter 9. The Paladin of Excess. Snow blanketed the ground like a burial shroud, each flake delicate and deceiving, hiding the rot and ruin beneath. The land had no name. It didn't need one. It was the threshold between what remained of the old world and the bleeding edge of chaos, a realm where sanity dissolved with each breath, and the sky wept colorless rain. Lucien stood on a hill of frozen corpses. They had come at dawn, mercenaries, zealots, even a minotaur draped in the flayed skin of elves. They sought coin, honor, glory. They found death. Now he waited, breath steaming through the slits of his mask, blade slick and humming with the aftershocks of slaughter. The cult behind him moved like worshippers in trance, daubing runes in the blood-stained snow, humming prayers without words. The wind carried the scent of burnt hair and perfumed rot. The world tasted of iron. Then, from the north, he arrived, clad in armor of impossible beauty, sculpted like muscle frozen in gold. Each plate was engraved with scenes of pleasure and torment, bodies twisted in both rapture and agony. Gems were inlaid along the greaves, glowing faintly. From his back draped a cape of living silk, shifting and coiling as though it breathed. The Paladin of Excess, a champion of Slaanesh. He rode a steed of nightmare, its flesh a patchwork of exposed nerve and scaled hide, its face blind yet always watching. As he dismounted, the snow beneath him turned pink. Lucien's pulse slowed. This was not a mere warrior. This was a test. The paladin drew his blade, a sinuous thing, shaped like a fang of starlight, pulsing with colors that didn't exist. It sang, not in voice, but in sensation. The cultists behind Lucien moaned. One collapsed, clutching their chest in weeping ecstasy. The paladin smiled. He spoke with a voice that caressed and flayed in equal measure. "You wear 2 marks. That offends me." Lucien answered only by lowering his sword to the ready. The hum of his weapon grew louder, sharper. The paladin tilted his head, amused. "Very well," he purred. "Let's dance." They met in an explosion of grace and fury. Steel clashed, not like thunder, but like a symphony played too loud. The paladin's strikes were fluid, hypnotic, so precise they left trails of starlight in the air. Lucien countered with a dancer's rhythm, spin, slash, retreat, return. They moved in perfect symmetry, 2 predators tasting one another's breath, blades sparking like struck flint. The first blood was drawn on Lucien's cheek, a shallow cut that burned like fire and kissed like a lover. He smiled behind the mask. The second exchange shattered a nearby statue as they ricocheted off one another, striking with such force the air cracked. The paladin's cape lashed at Lucien, wrapping his wrist. For a heartbeat he was bound. Then Lucien twisted, drove his knee into the paladin's side, and ripped free, tearing the silk with a sound like a woman's scream. The paladin laughed. The third exchange turned brutal. Lucien struck low, faint. The paladin took it, blocked high, mistake. Lucien pivoted and slammed the hilt of his blade into the paladin's throat. The sound was wet. The paladin staggered, coughing blood, his golden armor cracking where it had never cracked before. He looked up, grinning through the red. Yet they collided again. This time Lucien didn't parry. He embraced the blade, let it slide through his side, deep splitting muscle and ripping flesh. He screamed, but it was a scream of release, not pain. In that scream he spun, locked his blade against the paladin's exposed side, and thrust. Steel met bone. The paladin gasped, eyes wide. Lucien pulled back, stepped in again and stabbed upward, through the ribs, through the heart, through the throat, until the tip of the sword jutted from the base of the skull. The paladin shuddered and fell. He did not die quietly. His body spasmed, each twitch painting the snow in violent artistry. His blood was not red, but opalescent, cascading in streams of lavender, silver, and gold. It smelled of rose. Lucien stood over him, panting, blood dripping from both blade and wound. Then he knelt, not in reverence, but to claim. He reached down and tore the paladin's cape from the corpse. The living silk shrieked. It resisted. He forced it, wrapped it around his shoulders. It clung, hissed, then settled. The cult cheered, screamed. Some fell into fits of sobbing, others into ecstatic seizures. Lucien stood, transfigured. His cloak shimmered with impossible life. His sword pulsed like a second heart. And in that moment, the marks on his flesh, those branded by Corn and Slanish, flared together. No longer warring, now in harmony. The mask tilted upward, and Lucien whispered, "Only God can love me, but both need me." The wind answered with laughter, and the snow began to melt. Chapter 10. Dreams of the Eternal Arena. The nights were not quiet anymore. Even the stillest moments, when the wind dared not howl and the snow lay untouched, were pierced by something deeper. Not sound, pulse, a presence that beat in the very bones of the land, and within Lucien. Sleep did not come to him gently now. It took him, sudden, violent, and thick with visions that devoured the line between dream and prophecy. This night was no different. The cult slumbered in a shattered fortress, its spires broken like snapped fingers, walls painted with drying blood and looping calligraphy. Fires crackled low, bodies twitched in nightmares gifted by gods. And Lucien, cloaked in living silk, sword cradled across his lap, drifted into the abyss. It was not darkness. It was light. Blinding, pulsing, throbbing with unbearable color, pinks that bled into reds that bled into black. He stood barefoot upon marble that rippled like liquid flesh, beneath a sky stitched with veins of gold lightning and orgasmic screams echoing through unseen chambers. He was not alone. Around him towered walls of impossible height, sculpted from muscle and bone, feathers and steel. Every brick bore a screaming face, every column bled incense, and in the center, the arena. Not made by mortals, not made for them. It was infinite. No stands, no audience, just tier after tier of ascending platforms, each hosting warriors frozen in mid-duel, champions of ages long past, creatures not born but forged in madness, demons of elegance and horror locked in poses of death and perfection. And above it all, a throne of skin. He felt them, not seen, but felt in every breath of the dream. Slanish. Watching, not in competition, but anticipation. At the center of the arena, a new platform rose, smooth, untouched, ready. Lucien stepped forward. His blade pulsed, but he didn't grip it. It rose on its own, levitating, quelling to him. Then the voice, no longer whispering, no longer sly, a chorus, male and female, infant and elder, screamed and sung, "You are not mortal, not Damon, not yet. You are the seed, planted in blood, watered in suffering." Blooming in duality, figures emerged, in four corners, each a nightmare. The first, a juggernaut of brass, its limbs pistons, face a furnace of rage, its weapon a slab of rusted iron shaped like a cleaver. The second, a dancer in glass, its limbs serpents, its laughter shards of ice. It moved without sound, its blades extensions of its song. The third, a knight of hollow armor, filled only with smoke and voices, its blade inscribed with names of the dead. The fourth, a reflection, Lucien's own form, identical, masked, cloaked, blade ready. He did not run. The first clash shattered the dream. Time collapsed. Each heartbeat was a century. Each cut echoed through galaxies. He danced around the juggernaut, carving runes into its flanks with every strike. Blood, black and molten, fountained from its joints as he drove his sword into its core and ripped upward. The beast exploded into flame. The glass dancer moved in time with his breath, mirror perfect. They spun together like twin stars in orbit, until Lucien bent backward, let its blade pass inches from his heart, and plunged his own into its thigh. It sang in agony. He twisted. The note became divine. The hollow night fell in silence. Lucien struck low, then high, then into the helm, driving his blade through smoke and shadow until the voices screamed in unison. The armor cracked like porcelain. Emptiness fled. Then only one remained. Himself. They circled. Same stance, same breath, the same sword. Lucien knew every move before it came. Dodged himself, matched every strike. Until he did not. He let himself be struck. Cut deep across the belly. He welcomed the pain. And as his reflection paused, confused by the acceptance, Lucien stepped in and embraced it. Their blades met at the heart, and steel through flesh, through soul. Music, both screamed, both bled, and then only one remained. Lucien fell to his knees, bleeding but smiling. Around him, the arena erupted, not with sound, with feeling. 1,000 blades clashed in orgasmic rhythm. The marble floor pulsed, the dream howled. And the voice returned. You are worthy. You are chosen. You are the eternal duel. Lucien awoke, breathless, his body drenched in sweat and blood not his own, and across his chest new scars, carved by dream, written in divine script. He rose, and knew this was not a vision. This was invitation. Chapter 11, Pilgrimage to the Wastes. The sky above the chaos wastes did not hold stars. It held scars, wounds in the heavens that bled light, crimson and violet, churning and swirling, never still. Beneath them, the land twisted in agony, plains of flayed earth, forests of bone with leaves like razor glass, rivers that whispered names in voices no tongue should understand. Even time felt fractured here. Hours stretched or vanished without pattern, and the sun, when it dared rise, seemed to weep instead of shine. Lucien led them through this nightmare with the grace of a saint and the precision of a blade. Behind him came the cult of crimson silk, now swollen to a legion. Former mercenaries and nobles, outcasts and warlocks, all adorned in blood-slick robes and adorned in piercings of iron and gold. Their devotion was no longer whispered. It was screamed with every step, and still they followed. The pilgrimage had become a march of madness. He named it the Path of Perfect Carnage, and it began with a village, tucked in the last stretch of the north, half claimed by the wastes, yet clinging to civility. The people still prayed to Sigmar, still lit candles against the night, still hoped. Lucien extinguished that hope. He entered the village at dawn, alone. His blade still sang from its scabbard. His cloak slithered like a living shadow. They came to meet him, militiamen with halberds shaking in calloused hands, a priest clutching a hammer and muttering half-remembered benedictions. The villagers watched from windows, trembling behind shuttered eyes. Lucien said nothing. He simply walked. The first man screamed as his halberd snapped in half. Lucien was upon him, carving an upward stroke that split the jaw, peeled back flesh like paper. Blood fountained, warm and high. The second died without even raising his blade. A slash across the thigh, a pivot, then a thrust that buried steel beneath the ribcage, twisting until the heart gave up its final rhythm. The priest stood firm. Lucien met him with a dancer's spin. Their weapons collided. The priest struck with raw, desperate fury. Faith turned to muscle. But Lucien was divine precision. He parried, stepped forward, locked blades, and kissed the man's forehead through his mask. The priest hesitated. His improvement with active living, that was all it took. Lucien slid his sword into the man's gut, then up, slowly, until the tip punched through the collarbone. The priest choked. Lucien held him, gently, like a lover, as the hammer fell from limp fingers. By noon, the village was a shrine. Bodies arranged in spirals. Children painted with blood in sigils not meant for mortal eyes. The cult arrived behind him, singing, stripping flesh to decorate the town square. One woman strung a man's tendons like harp strings and played hymns to chaos. Lucien sat upon the altar of the village's chapel, now recarved with the twin sigils of Slanesh and Corn, intertwined like lovers devouring one another. And he preached. His voice, once silent, now rang with fire. "You've been told the gods' war, that Corn hates pleasure, that Slanesh fears purity. Lies. They do not fight. They fuck. In every strike, in every cry, in every act of sublime violence, they are one." He skulked, moaned in unison. "You kill with purpose, but you kill beautifully. You carve your path in both blood and silk. You are not just warriors, you are a seraphim of slaughter." He stood, raised his blade, and pointed to the horizon. "Now we go to the black cliffs, where the dead walk and the sky weeps ash, where champions are forged or broken." The wind screamed approval. They marched again, across plains of flesh, through storms of teeth, past beasts that watched but dared not attack. Lucien's presence was no longer human. It radiated, a corona of madness, a pulse that bent the earth with each step. At night, the fires sang to him. His dreams became battles before they happened. He saw the next kill, the next sacrifice, the next duel. His skin itched with hunger, not for food, not for sleep, but for the next perfect kill. He was not tired. He was not mortal. He was becoming, and the wastes welcomed him. Chapter 12. The Blood-Frosted Spire. The black cliffs tore into the sky like the jagged vertebrae of a buried god, their edges serrated and black as obsidian. At their base sprawled a frozen wasteland known only as the Skinflay Expanse, where blizzards howled like wolves, and the snow fell in sheets thick with ash and bone dust. The wind here didn't simply cut flesh, it peeled it. Lucien welcomed it. He marched into the storm without hesitation, his crimson cloak trailing behind him like a bleeding wound across the white. Around him, the cult of crimson silk trudged with maddened devotion, faces wrapped in veils, limbs scarred from ritual offerings, their breath visible in clouds of agony and ecstasy. They had followed him into madness. Now they followed him into death's womb. At the summit of the tallest cliff stood the blood-frosted spire, a monolith of black ice and ancient violence. Once it had been a temple. Now it was a battlefield frozen in time. Its flanks were littered with the remains of those who had dared approach. Warriors half buried in snow, their limbs twisted, their armor frozen to their bones. Great banners, long since torn, flapped listlessly in the wind, emblazoned with skulls, blades, sigils of forgotten warbands. And looming before the gate, guarding the ascent, stood him. A champion of corn. 8 feet tall, clad in plates so thick it looked like it had been hewn from anvils and fused with flesh. His face was a snarling helmet crowned with jagged horns, his breath venting through slits like dragon's steam. Upon his shoulders rested a massive great axe, twin-bladed, each edge inscribed with burning runes. Blood steamed from the ice beneath his boots, never freezing. He spoke in a voice that sounded like a forge being torn apart. Only the worthy ascend. Lucien stepped forward, his blade already in hand. "I am not here to ascend," he said, calmly. "I'm here to prove." The warrior laughed, a thunderous metal-on-bone sound. Then bleed. The clash shook the cliff. The first blow from the axe was a downward arc that cleaved into the ground, sending a shockwave of broken ice in every direction. Lucien darted aside, his movement a liquid ribbon of silk and blood. He responded with a slash, aimed for the knee, but the warrior twisted, catching the blow on his greave, retaliating with a backhand that Lucien barely dodged. The wind howled around them, carving spirals into the snow as steel met steel. Lucien struck like a lover spurned, fast, close, intimate. He slid beneath the axe's second swing, slashing across the back of the warrior's thigh, drawing blood so thick it poured like molten tar. The warrior roared, grabbing Lucien by the throat with a gauntleted hand, lifting him high. The pressure was immense. Julien's vision blurred. Then he smiled and drove his sword into the warrior's armpit, deep, sliding between the plates, twisting. The warrior dropped him, stumbling back with a guttural cry. Lucien hit the ground, rolled, came up, and slashed low, severing the tendons behind the knee. The warrior collapsed to one leg. Now Lucien circled. The cult began to chant. Low, urgent, hungry. Lucien's blade danced. He carved symbols into the warrior's breastplate, not to kill, but to defile. Each mark tore flesh beneath, blood hissing in the freezing air. The warrior swung again, desperate, furious, but Lucien was gone, behind him, whispering, "This is what devotion looks like." He drove the blade through the warrior's spine. Not once, 7 times. Each strike precise, measured, beautiful. The warrior let out a final growl, a death rattle, and fell forward into the snow, his blood forming a pool that steamed into mist, red against white. Lucien stood over the corpse, breath slow, the sword humming with divine satisfaction. Then he tore the axe from the dead man's hands and raised it high. The cult screamed in rapture. And then, with deliberate motion, Lucien shattered the axe against the steps of the spire. Steel broke like glass. The act was not symbolic. It was sacrament. He turned to the frozen gate, and it opened. Not by mortal hand, not by mechanism, but by acceptance. The spire let him in. Within, the halls were lined with frozen blood, sculptures of warriors locked in death poses, their final screams etched into frost. The air vibrated with violence, with worship, with the weight of every duel ever fought on this mountain. At the center of the chamber stood a throne, not of gold nor of bone, but of blades, and upon it nothing. Lucien stepped forward and sat. The blades cut into him. He did not flinch. His blood dripped slowly, staining the stone beneath. The walls pulsed. The runes on his skin burned bright. And he heard the voice again, Corn, this time. Not words, just approval. Pure, thunderous, unrelenting. He had not forsaken his love for the duel. He had not traded elegance for raw fury. He had balanced both. He had earned both. He was not just a knight. He was the blade itself. Lucien stood. The throne bled with him. And behind him, the doors to the spire sealed shut, not with chains, but with finality. He was ready, not to worship, but to lead. Chapter 13. The Caress of Blades. Beyond the blood-frosted spire, the wastes twisted into something crueler. The land here had no true shape. Hills breathed. The sky bled ink. Trees were made of screaming limbs wrapped around obsidian trunks, and the ground felt soft beneath the boots, like walking on half-living flesh. There was no sun, only a sallow light that shimmered from nowhere and everywhere, casting shadows that did not match the shapes that birthed them. Lucien walked through this world as one untouched. Where others wept from the pressure of the air or clawed their faces at the scent of madness, he moved like a god through his garden. He was drawn to the scent of roses. But there were no flowers, only body. The garden of caresses revealed itself gradually, mists parting like curtains, unveiling a valley filled with statues that were not carved, but frozen in their final moments. Warriors, lovers, priests, monsters, all caught in throes of ecstasy, pain, or both. Each sculpture pulsed faintly, alive, a monument to sensation. At its heart stood a palace of flesh and glass, its walls translucent, showing silhouettes of those inside, but the figures shifted, merged and distorted like dreams seen through tearful eyes. The gates opened not with creaks but with moans, and Lucien entered alone, his blade sheathed for the first time in days. The scent was overwhelming, perfume and rot, incense and sweat. The palace pulsed to a rhythm, a heartbeat not his own. In the great hall there stood a throne of living bodies, writhing, shifting, flesh on flesh, masked in gold and bound in silk. Upon it lounged a figure wrapped in robes that shimmered with every blink, red, violet, blue, black. Their face was neither male nor female, young nor old, just perfect. A mask that smiled without moving. They were not a demon, not a god, but something between, a herald of Slaanesh. Their voice came like warm wine poured over the soul. Duelborn, we have watched you. Lucien did not kneel. He walked forward, slow, deliberate. And what have you seen? The herald rose. Around them, dancers spun, naked save for filaments of silver and blades tied to wrists and ankles. Their dance was not for beauty. It was a duel in disguise. Every twirl slicing the air, every bend a dodge, every embrace a feint. Blood stained the marble floor from the performance, and it glistened underfoot like spilled rubies. The herald stepped into Lucien's path. We have seen your elegance, your violence, your balance. Their hand reached out, gloved in skin that wasn't theirs, and caressed Lucien's faceplate. You have felt the glory of precision, the art of ending life just so. Lucien remained still. You seek more, the herald said. You hunger for perfection, not just in death, but in being. The herald turned, beckoned. Then come, let the blade guide you deeper. Lucien followed. through halls of glass where duels played out in silence, shadows locked in eternal combat, their swords melting into each other, through chambers where sound became color, and wounds became music, through doors that opened into emotions. And at last, a sanctum. There lay a circle of daggers, each blade hovering in the air, tips pointed inward. A voice, this time from everywhere, spoke. To know Slanesh you must surrender to pain. To embrace it is not consequence, but communion. Lucien stepped into the circle. The daggers struck, not with rage, but with affection. They pierced his arms, his thighs, his chest, not to kill but to open. Each one sank with the slow tenderness of a kiss, sending shudders of agony laced with rapture through his nerves. Blood ran down his legs in elegant lines. His knees buckled. He laughed, not from joy, from understanding. Each wound sang. Each cut spoke. He saw his past laid bare, every duel, every moment of triumph. But he also saw his fears, his failures, the cries of those who had begged him for mercy, and how their pleas had thrilled him more than their deaths. And he welcomed it. At the climax, a final blade, larger than the rest, etched in runes of longing and suffering, descended into his heart. Not to stop it, but to mark it. His back arched, his mouth opened in a silent scream, and the circle of daggers dissolved. Lucien collapsed to the floor. The herald knelt beside him and whispered, "Now you know. You do not wield a sword. You are the sword. Cut. Bleed. Be bled." They kissed his forehead and were gone. Lucien rose. Wounded. Heal. His blade returned to his hand, not carried, not summoned, simply there, as if it had never left. And it pulsed with pleasure. Outside the palace, the cult waited. He emerged naked from the waist up, his wounds still open, glowing faintly with violet light. The cult dropped to their knees. He raised his blade, voice calm. "We walk the path not of pain, nor of war, but of perfect violence." And the wind wept with longing. Chapter 14. The Arena of Wills. There are places in the chaos wastes where the landscape is not made of rock or flesh or ash, but of mind. The Arena of Wills was one such place. It rose from the dust like a mirage, visible only to those who had killed enough, suffered enough, become enough. Lucien saw it not with his eyes, but with his soul. One moment there was barren frost, the next a colossal colosseum towered before him, made not from stone but from conviction. Every arch was bound by willpower, every step carved by the ambition of champions who had come and been unmade. Lucien stood at the gates. Behind him, the cult of crimson silk knelt, heads bowed, offering prayers not to gods, but to him. His body was marked with swirling scars and sigils, his chest bare beneath the living silk of his cloak, the blade on his back humming like an eager beast caged too long. He stepped forward. The gates opened, not by touch, not by command, but because they recognized him. Inside, not dead silence, a waiting silence. The arena was vast, rimmed by monoliths that shifted and whispered as he passed. No audience, no sky, only walls of memory, rising high into a void that pulsed with unseen breath. Lucien walked to the center, and the ground pulsed. From the soil, something rose. A figure, his own height, his own gait. And then the mask. His mask. The figure who rose before him was himself. Not a simple mirror image, but true. Same scars, same cloak, same eyes. but the look they held was not his. It was before. Lucien saw it, what he had been. The disgraced knight. The man who still hesitated before a kill, who still asked questions instead of letting the blade answer, who doubted, who regretted. Lucien did not draw his sword. He merely said, "You are not me." The shade tilted its head. "I am what you buried." The arena of wills locked around them. The space shrank. The monoliths groaned inward. Time froze. Then steel was drawn, and war began. The first clash was a storm, steel to steel, perfect synchronicity. Sparks sprayed like shattered stars. Lucien met his pass with equal grace. Every movement reflected like a dark ballet. Parry, slash, evade, riposte. But he felt the hesitation in the mirror's strikes. Every blow was laced with fear. Lucien exploited it. He drove his shoulder into the shade's chest, knocked it backward, followed with a slash that opened its side. Blood, not red, but gray, like memory, spilled. The shade stumbled, but it did not die. They roared. Suddenly, its form changed. Lucien watched his younger self melt away, replaced by another version, his ambition. The knight who had dreamed of power, of godhood, of eternal glory. This Lucien wore a golden crown, eyes wide with hunger. He struck wildly, powerful, erratic, devastating. Lucien bled. Across the ribs, along the thigh, a deep cut through the forearm. The crown-wearing Lucien screamed as he fought, his voice filled with rage and desire. "I am what you wanted." Lucien blocked, slid, rolled, countered with a spinning kick that knocked the crown away, then slashed his blade upward, carving a cross from hip to shoulder. The shade staggered. It writhed and transformed again. Now it was beautiful. Lucien stared as the shade rose, now cloaked not in battle, but in perfection. Its blade glittered like moonlight. Its face was untouched. It moved with Slaanesch's grace, smiling with an ecstasy only death could offer. "I am what you became." This version moved like a serpent, fast and dazzling. Lucien was pushed to the edge. Every strike came with rhythm like a lover's moan. He was sliced shallow dozens of times. Death, not as ending, but as art form. "But," Lucien growled. "No," he hissed. He dropped low, accepted a cut across the face, and drove his fist into the shade's gut, then twisted the hilt of his sword into a hammer strike, crushing the clone's mask. It shattered. The face beneath was his own. Bleeding, weeping. "Then what are you now?" the shade gasped, blood trickling down its lip. Lucien stepped close. "I am not what I was, not what I wanted, not what I became." He raised the sword. "I am what remains." And with one final, downward stroke, he split the shade from brow to breastbone. The body convulsed and dissolved. The arena shuddered. Light exploded. The monolith sang. Lucien fell to one knee, breathing hard, alone, victorious. Then he rose. Behind him, the gates of the arena swung wide. He had faced himself not once, but thrice, and each version had failed. Now he alone remained. No longer a man, no longer a knight, not yet a god, but more than mortal. The cult waited at the gates. He emerged into their silence, bloodied, but not broken, and all around him, the chaos wastes whispered one word: ascend. Chapter 15. The Bond of Iron Flesh. The forge was not a place. It was a being. Lucien found it beneath the crust of a mountain made from the bones of titans long devoured by the chaos gods. The entrance was a wound in the earth, a jagged crack that bled fire instead of blood, lined with molten stone veins pulsing like arteries. The air inside was so hot it did not burn. It peeled, searing flesh from bone, soul from skin. It reeked of iron, ash, and the screams of those who came before him. Lucien entered without fear. His flesh blistered, his blood boiled, his skin hissed beneath the silk cloak, and the sword on his back purred. At the heart of the mountain, in a chamber the size of a cathedral, stood the demon smith. It was a thing of iron and flesh, its limbs forged from anvils fused with sinew, its head a furnace, venting screams instead of smoke. Each movement hissed and clicked with rusted elegance, its eyes two molten coals that saw past the veil of existence. Around it, chained spirits wailed, their translucent forms beaten into hammers, bellows, and chisels. It spoke not with words, but with impact, every footstep on the obsidian floor a sentence, every clank of chain a question. Lucien approached and knelt. The demon smith studied him in silence, then turned and spoke into the flames. Blade, one soul, bound by choice, not forged for war, forged for need. Lucien laid his sword on the black anvil, a slab of raw reality, cracked from the weight of countless sins. The moment the blade touched it, the chamber screamed. Not sound, a psychic roar that shook the marrow. The demon smith raised a hammer formed from a dead star's core. It swung. The first strike shattered illusion. Lucien saw every life the blade had taken, every throat split, every eye stabbed, every rib cracked open. Faces flickered past in perfect detail. Some begged, some smiled, all bled. The second strike broke memory. He relived the pain, each wound he'd received. Each time his body failed, his fear flared. He felt his knee snap under the orc's axe, the glass dancer's cut that nearly severed his ear, the sensation of blood running down his thighs in the circle of daggers. The third strike crushed out. Lucien screamed, not in agony, but in clarity. The blade had not been his tool. It had been him, and now it would be again. The demon smith reached forward, and from its chest it tore a lump of molten iron, still writhing, like a heart just ripped from a beast. It pressed this into the sword's core, fusing it with Lucien's blood. The steel drank it greedily. A mouth long silent now howled with rebirth. The smith gestured. Lucien understood. He removed his gauntlet, then his arm. He laid it on the anvil, bare to the shoulder. The demon smith raised the hammer. Lucien did not flinch. Flesh exploded, bone shattered. His arm, his sword arm, was gone. In its place, the blade, not attached, fused. Where sinew had been, now was edge. Where fingers once flexed, now curled the hilt permanently. The sword was no longer carried. It was worn. The metal cooled unnaturally fast, smooth, blackened steel wrapping from his shoulder down to the tip of a weapon, shaped by wrath and desire. Lucien stood. His heart beat through the sword now. He felt everything through it, the vibration of the air, the tension in the stone, the heartbeat of the demon smith watching him. The blade had become his nerve, his tongue, his limb. The demon smith knelt. Knowledge submission. In respect. Lucien turned, the sword humming with divine resonance, and ascended the stairs carved from kneeling torsos, each step a living agony trapped in stone. When he emerged from the mountain, the sky split with thunder. His cult beheld him in awe. The sword arm gleamed in the ashlight, every movement smooth, organic, inhuman. They prostrated themselves. And he spoke, his voice a blend of man and metal. No longer do I bear the blade. I'm the blade. He raised it, and the very clouds bled. Of the gods trembled, not in fear, in anticipation. Chapter 16. The Duel of Doctrines. The plains of Corval were littered with bones, some ancient, some fresh, all stripped clean by the scavenging winds that never ceased to scream across the cracked, blood-black earth. Once, this had been a battlefield. Now it was a stage, and Lucien stood at its center, his cloak whispering behind him, his sword arm gleaming like a polished fang under a sky that looked as if it might collapse from the weight of its own madness. The cult had formed a circle around him, hundreds now, faces masked, bodies painted with their own blood, chanting low hymns of dual devotion. Each syllable was a blade sliding between ribs, each breath a prayer of praise and blasphemy in equal measure. The storm began as a ripple in the air. Then the ground split, and from the fissure rose a chariot pulled by armored beasts stitched from muscle and fire, dragging behind it a throne of iron skulls upon which sat a warrior. He was enormous, more war than man, a chaos lord of Khorne. His armor was a fusion of furnace-wrought bronze and flesh, the plates bolted into his ribcage, steam hissing from vents along his spine. His helm was horned, and his eyes glowed with the rage of 1,000 battles. Across his back was strapped a war cleaver longer than Lucien was tall. It pulsed with a heartbeat that echoed with every footstep he took. He dismounted, and the earth trembled. "Lucien, the duel-born," the Lord spat. His voice was fire breaking through steel. "I have watched your ascent. It offends me." Lucien didn't move. "You mix blood with silk, fury with softness. You preach duality. There is only wrath. Only the pure kill. Your existence is heresy made flesh." Lucien's blade arm rose slightly, the edge catching the light like a grin. "And yet," he replied calmly, "you still speak to me. If I am a heresy, then why do you tremble?" The Chaos Lord roared. He leapt forward, no ceremony, no honor. Only violence. Julien met him. The first blow sent shockwaves across the plains. The cleaver came down like judgment, a strike that could cleave mountains. Lucien sidestepped, not with brute force, but with elegance, the kind that mocked the raw fury of his foe. He spun beneath the arc, blade flashing, and slashed across the Lord's knee. Sparks flew. Blood hissed on the scorched ground. The Lord retaliated with a shoulder charge that launched Lucien through a pillar of bone. He hit hard, the impact cracking the femurs and ribs that made up the ancient column. Dust clouded the air. Lucien rose, smiling. His left eye bled, his lip split. He felt alive. The Lord charged again. Lucien moved to meet him, faster, sharper. This time he struck mid-lunge, his sword arm carving a perfect line across the warrior's side. A spray of blood painted the cult. The Lord bellowed, spinning, cleaver lashing out. Lucien ducked, then sank the blade upward into the Lord's shoulder, pushing with all his strength. Steel bit flesh, metal met bone. He twisted. The scream was not human. The Chaos Lord swung wildly, backhanding Lucien with enough force to send him rolling across the field. The blade arms sparked against stone, gouging trenches in the earth. He came to a stop, gasping, then laughed through blood-streaked teeth. "You bleed well," Lucien said. The Chaos Lord ripped off his helmet, revealing a face more scar than skin, teeth like shattered stone. "Enough games." He drew a second blade, shorter, jagged, still wet with the ichor of something that should never have lived. And the duel truly began. No words now, only violence. Steel shrieked against steel, the ground fractured beneath their feet. Every clash cracked the air. Lucien moved like a storm of precision, cutting tendons, lacerating arteries, each strike a prayer to perfection. The Chaos Lord answered with fury, every swing an earthquake, every howl a challenge to the gods themselves. Then, blood. Lucien feinted left, ducked under a backhand slash, and drove his blade arm through the Lord's gut. So deep it emerged through the back. The Lord grabbed Lucien's throat. Lucien twisted the blade. The scream that followed echoed for miles. The Lord collapsed to his knees. Lucien leaned in close. "You were right," he whispered. "There is purity in death, but it's not yours." He pulled free. The Lord toppled forward. The silence that followed was holy. The cult erupted, howling, shrieking, clawing their own flesh in devotion. Some fell into seizures. Others wept. Lucien stood above the corpse of his accuser, of the last true bastion of one God's zealotry, and raised his blade high. "I am not a contradiction," he roared. "I am completion." The ground split again, this time not in rage, but in recognition. From the chasm rose fire and silk. And above, in the sky where no stars lived, two glows flared. When violet, watching, when not turning away. Chapter 17. The Massacre Ballet. The city of Sorvath had once been proud, an outpost of defiance, walled with blackstone and guarded by pyromantic wards. Built at the mouth of the Maw Rift, it stood as a final beacon for mortals, clinging to civilization before the chaos wastes consumed all. Now it would become stage. Lucien stood atop the highest dune, overlooking the city at dawn. Below him the people of Sorvath bustled, unaware. Soon they would perform, not by choice, by necessity. Behind Lucien stretched a valley filled with followers, his cult, his choir of carnage, thousands strong, clad in robes stained by their own devotion, wielding blades too ornate for mere killing. Their bodies bore both the red glyphs of Corn and the coiling elegance of Slanish's sigils, their voices humming a dissonant hymn that vibrated the dust beneath their feet. Lucien's sword arm gleamed in the half-light. The sun had not yet dared rise fully. You raised it. And the symphony began. The march into Sorvath was not a charge. It was a procession. Drummers beat a rhythm, drawn from the heartbeats of flayed captives. Dancers spun ahead of the front lines, their blades extensions of their limbs, twirling in formation, carving patterns of gore into the earth. They entered the gates, not with siege, but with art. The guards were the first to die. Lucien descended from the wall in a single, balletic leap, his cloak flaring behind him like a second soul. His blade arm struck with impossible grace, slicing through one guard's neck in a perfect arc, the blood spray catching the morning light like a sunrise of slaughter. The second guard raised a spear. Lucien pirouetted under it, severed the arm at the elbow, then slit the throat in one upward flourish that ended in a bow. The cult flowed in behind him, not in disarray, but in formation, choreographed madness. Each cell moved with precise, obscene beauty. A pair of twins performed mirrored kills down an alley, their victims falling like petals from a wilted rose. A quartet encircled a noble's estate, slashing down every defender with sweeping, synchronized lunges, then painted the walls with the noble's entrails in blooming spiral sigils. The streets became rivers. Red ran with every gutter. Lucien strode through the carnage, untouched. A conductor, his presence radiated harmony, pain and pleasure in perfect tempo. Citizens screamed, but even their cries were folded into the melody of murder. At the temple square, resistance gathered. Soldiers in flame-forged armor, battle priests clutching twin-headed maces. They chanted prayers to Sigmar, to Mor, to any who might hear. Lucien heard them. He walked alone to meet them. Steel rang. The first blow came from a hammer aimed at his skull. He caught it with his bare hand. Bones cracked as he twisted the weapon free, reversed it, and slammed it into the wielder's sternum, imploding the chest cavity with a single brutal thrust. Blood sprayed from the man's mouth as he dropped to his knees, then fell face first. The next came from the side. Lucien doubted. He twirled past the blow, his blade arm carving a clean crescent that opened the attacker's stomach, intestines spilling onto the stone in a steaming pile. A priest bellowed and charged, his robes glowing with wards. Lucien met him with a smirk beneath the mask. The duel was short. The priest's mace struck Lucien's shoulder but did not stop him. Lucien stepped into the pain, embraced it, and drove his blade through the priest's ribs, angled upward into the heart. He didn't pull it free. Instead, he lifted the priest on the blade, holding him high above the square. The cult roared in unison. The priest convulsed once, then went still. Lucien let the body slide down the blade with agonizing slowness, then stepped forward as it dropped, lifeless. And Sorvath shattered. The wards flickered and failed. The remaining defenders broke. Some fled, some begged, some fought. But it did not matter. The cult flooded the city, like music turned to flame. Children were not spared, elders were not pitied. Sorvath had become a canvas, and Lucien painted it with the colors of chaos. By sunset, the massacre was complete. The air reeked of copper and incense. The screams had become distant memories, and Lucien stood in the center of the ruined city, surrounded by his faithful, their bodies smeared with blood, their eyes glowing with purpose. He climbed the stairs of the desecrated temple, once a monument to order, now a tower of silence. At the top, he raised his blade. Around him, his army knelt. He did not speak. The city spoke for him. Its silence, its beauty. The massacre ballet was done, and in the sky above, twin lights flared, one red as war, one violet as desire. Neither turned away. Chapter 18. The Whispering Crown. Sorvath's ashes still drifted through the air like snow when Lucien began to dream again. Not the chaotic visions that plagued the minds of the damned, not the screaming echoes of the slain. These dreams were intentional, precise, crafted like blades, forged like truth. He stood in a void not of darkness but of velvet, rich, purple-black. It caressed his skin. The floor was blood, warm and reflective. His footsteps left no ripple. There were no stars, no horizon, just the throne, rising from the liquid like the peak of a monolith, sunken in time. It was shaped like a skull wearing a crown of thorns. The bones wept gold. And seated upon it, Lucien, but not him. This Lucien wore no mask. His eyes were not red and violet, but pure black, endless and consuming. His sword arm had become a limb of writhing steel, constantly shifting, claws, blades, tongues of flame and silk. The cloak around his shoulders was alive, breathing, dripping with ichor that steamed with pleasure and pain. And upon his brow rested a crown, a halo of whispering mouths. Each one spoke at once. Some hissed secrets, others screamed battles. A few wept songs of love twisted by despair. One mouth, small and serene, spoke only in sobbing laughter. The crowned Lucien looked at the real one. "You've come far." Lucien, breathing slow, replied, "I was always meant to." The crowned Lucien stood, and the whispers grew louder. "You have pleased them both. You have shown wrath without chaos, lust without weakness. Corn salivates at your carnage. Slaanesh moans at your poise." Lucien tilted his head. "And yet they wait. Still they watch, but do not claim." The crowned Lucien stepped closer. "They don't own you." He circled. "You're not a servant, not even a champion. You are," he paused, a whisper slipping between every word, a paradox. Lucien felt the words like hooks beneath his skin. He crowned Lucien, held out the crown. Take it. And become. Lucien reached for it, and the world screamed. His body arched in agony as the whispers poured into him. Not words now, truths. Each one a cut, a kiss, a kill. His past shattered, his future split. He saw himself dying 1,000 ways, laughing, bleeding, exulting. He saw the gods arguing over his corpse, then kneeling to it. He gripped the crown and fused with it. It did not rest on his brow. It bored into his skull. Mouths opened across his arms, his shoulders, his spine, tiny, tooth-lined slits that murmured to him constantly. Some praised, some begged, some mocked, but all obeyed. He woke in Sorbot's temple, gasping, blood streaming from his nose, his mouth, his eyes. The cult stood around him, silent, terrified, worshipful. He stood slowly, and the whispers echoed from within him. They heard them, every one. Lucien raised his blade, now fused deeper into his being than ever before. It pulsed with his breath, with his thought. "I no longer serve Khorne," he said, voice layered with the tone of 1,000 others. "I no longer obey Slaanesh." He looked to the sky, where the twin lights watched, still. "I'll wear them." The cult dropped to their knees, weeping. Some screamed, and clawed their eyes out just to feel what he felt. Lucien walked to the ruined altar of Sorvath, where the last remnants of mortal gods still lingered, burnt icons, shattered effigies. He placed his hand on the stone. It melted beneath his touch. From it rose a new symbol. Not Kozgil, not Slaanesh's coil, contrived and twined, encircled by a halo of open mouths. In the whispering crown, Lucien stepped back, and the world listened. He was no longer the blade. He was the voice the blade answered to. Chapter 19. The Shattering Symphony. The sky over the obsidian flats cracked open like a drumhead split by rage. Lightning screamed downward in forked tangents of violet and blood red, painting the world below in unnatural light. The wind howled with 1,000 voices, each one pleading, laughing, sobbing, roaring. The earth, once still, now shuddered in rhythm, pulsing to a beat not heard, but felt. Lucien stood alone on the plains, his cult left miles behind by his command. He wanted no audience, only witnesses. His blade arm hung loose at his side, relaxed, eager. His chest was bare, painted in fresh sigils of war and indulgence, swirls of sacrificial gore and incense ash. The crown of whispering mouths nested atop his skull, each lipless hole mumbling in time with his pulse. It was not a duel. This was fate. They arrived without sound. First, the greater demon of Khorne. It towered above Lucien, 12 feet of iron-wrought muscle, its skull-faced helm fused into bone, breath steaming in jets of molten hate. Its weapon was a cleaver the size of a siege tower, dragging behind it a trail of scorched earth. It didn't speak. Khorne's chosen never did, unless it was through the scream of death. Then came the Keeper of Secrets, a nightmare of elegance. 8 arms, each tipped with a different instrument of exquisite agony, needle-thin rapiers, curved hooks, razors that shimmered with carnal promise. Its eyes wept silver. Its voice poured into Lucien's mind like perfume through a crack in the skull. "You wear both their marks," it cooed. "That cannot stand." Lucien did not bow. He raised his blade arm. The demon charged first. The ground split beneath its charge. Each step slammed like a drumbeat of raw fury. It moved with speed that belied its bulk, bringing the cleaver down in a vertical arc that could cleave fortresses. Lucien didn't block. He sidestepped, his body bending like water, like silk, spinning inward, using the moment of impact to lift himself atop the demon's shoulder. The cleaver hit the ground behind him, kicking up shards of obsidian the size of men. Lucien plunged his blade down deep into the base of the demon's neck. It roared. Blood sprayed upward in geysers of molten brass, but Lucien was already moving. He backflipped off the beast as it staggered, carving a spiral of cuts down its back mid-air, then hit the ground and rolled, coming up just as the keeper struck. The duel changed tempo. Where the cornet demon had been brute percussion, the keeper was melody, a dance of slicing limbs and sensual feints. It moved with impossible grace, twirling through its strikes, blade-laced fingers carving wounds that sang as they opened. Lucien responded in kind. He met its rhythm, matching tempo for tempo, each cut a note in a symphony of blood. The keeper slashed across his chest. Lucien pirouetted, spinning beneath the strike to return one of his own, his blade arm carving an X across the demon's thigh. It hissed with pleasure. Yes. They fought in circles, painting the battlefield with sweeping arcs of red and violet. Lucien bled. The keeper bled. The corn demon, wounded but not down, rejoined with a howl, cleaver swinging wide like a crashing cymbal. Lucien became mute. He ducked under one blade, leapt over another, let the keeper's hook tear a gash across his back, then used the momentum to roll across its arm, drive his blade through its wrist, severing it completely. Screams filled the air. The corn demon lunged again, cleaver high, but Lucien twisted beneath the blow, grabbed the severed arm of the keeper, and plunged the still squirming blade hand into the demon's eye. A spurt of molten ichor exploded outward. The demon fell to one knee. Lucien ran up its chest like a staircase, blade arm drawn back. He drove it through the demon's forehead, deep, until it struck bone and split it. The demon fell, and the keeper screamed. It charged in despair and ecstasy, limbs flailing, mouth wide in rapturous grief. Lucien turned and welcomed it. Their final clash was chaos incarnate. Steel, flesh, flame. Lucien was cut across his stomach. Intestines spilled. But he pushed through. He slashed off 2 more arms. The keeper licked the blood from its lips. Lucien screamed in bliss and rage, his body no longer his, only a vessel for expression. He caught the keeper by the throat, forced it to kneel, and kissed it. The kiss bled light, and in that moment, with the keeper's face twisted in both horror and euphoria, he drove his blade arm up through its chest. The heart burst in a rain of perfume and bile. The keeper crumbled. Dead. Lucien stood in a crater of corpses, covered in cuts, feeling blood, laughing. Above him the sky cracked again. 2 forces descended, not in form, but in feeling. Slanesh, not to claiming, but to witness. He had not chosen. He had defied. He was not theirs. He was his own. Lucien raised his blade, and the wastes screamed in thunderous applause. Chapter 20. The Blade of Ecstatic Blood. It began with silence. Not the absence of sound, but the end of need. The battlefield where Lucien stood, knee-deep in the ichor of 2 fallen greater daemons, pulsed no longer. The chaos wastes themselves, the ever-shifting hellscape of sin and steel, had gone still. Even the wind held its breath. Lucien stood in the crater, blood-soaked, trembling with the strain of a body that should no longer live. His guts hung in slithering coils, chest carved open in a lattice of wounds that bled rhythmically. His left eye had sealed shut beneath a mat of clotted gore. and his breath came in shallow rasps that steamed the cold air. But he stood, unbroken, not because he had survived, but because he had become. The sword, fused into his right arm, no longer merely pulsed. It sang. It was no longer steel. It had absorbed too much. Spirit, identity, godhood. It shifted subtly with each breath, alive, an extension not just of Lucien's body but of his soul. Its surface shimmered between silver, crimson, and amethyst, veins of light moving beneath its surface like blood in a vein. Around the crater's edge, the cult of crimson silk gathered in reverent silence. They had not seen the duel, but they felt its echo, like the final chord of a symphony that never ends. Lucien turned toward them, and they collapsed to their knees. He stepped forward, slow, dragging his broken form over the jagged ground. Each footfall was a miracle, each breath a declaration. He climbed the slope of scorched obsidian as if ascending a throne made of flame and ash. At the summit he stood above them all, and lifted his blade arm. The crown of mounts upon his head whispered as one. Lucien opened his remaining eye, and it burned with divine clarity. "I have killed for rage," he said, voice low, iron and silk. "I have slain for beauty. I have spilled blood for coin, for pride, for pleasure." He paused. "But today I killed gods." The cult screamed as one, no words, no language, just ecstasy. He continued. "Forn wanted me to become a weapon. Slanesh wanted me to become a masterpiece. They did not know." He raised the sword higher, and it bled light. "I was always both." From the heavens above, the warp tore open, an eye blinking into existence, wide and infinite. Red and violet in equal measure, it pulsed with chaotic recognition. Two divine entities, usually locked in eternal conflict, now stood on either side of this being, Lucien, the anomaly, the paradox, the answer. They did not fight. They did not speak. They only watched. Lucien turned from them and drove the blade down into the earth. It pierced with no resistance. The ground screamed. A pulse shot outward, like a heartbeat, like an orgasm, like a death rattle of a world undone. It spread across the wastes, a shock wave that flayed the land, turned rock to silk, flame to blood, air to song. Mountains crumbled in waves of light. Creatures of chaos fell to their knees, mouths open in primal adoration. Across the mortal realms, prophets convulsed in fevered awe. Warlocks clawed out their own eyes to see him more clearly in their minds. Champions of chaos dropped their weapons in sudden doubt. And deep within the warp, two gods smiled, not in dominance, but in devotion. Lucien stood over the broken earth, the sword now pulsing like a second heart embedded in the planet's skin. His body glowed from within, lines of power surging through his veins, across his bones, weaving his soul into something more than flesh. He was no longer a knight, no longer a man, not demon, not mortal, not god. He was the blade. And wherever blood was spilled, wherever a scream rose in perfect pitch, wherever a death was dealt with beauty, with fury, with purpose, there his name would echo. Lucien, the blade of ecstatic blood. The symphony was not over. It had only just begun.